All right, what is up, everyone? It's Shrieker here. Um, we're going to be talking about pages 109 through 119, apush. Um, so yes, I think it was Voltaire that said all men are equal. It is not birth, but rather virtue. I think it's not birth, but virtue that enables. But in France, it wasn't really birth; it was availability to furs and alliances with the Native Americans. And they were often very pragmatic in their alliances, and they were a little bit fewer. They were well organized, but and rather than forming large settlements, they relied a little bit more on trading. The French had a lot of tension with the English. If you look at the historical context between France and England, there has been a lot of tension between them. There's a lot of wars. Notably, I think there was um, I think there's the this is after the so-called 7 Year War. So it's a 7 Year War, something like that. But yeah, France was basically going to fan out. Expanded from sort of landing in Canada, and they expanded influence, and they clashed with both native groups and English settlers. So French relied on alliances, which was their demise, in my opinion. I think this is sort of they relied too much. If from a truly like sort of cold perspective, I think that was their downfall. They relied on the Native Americans, and the Native Americans weren't too enough organized enough to sort of be fully relied on as an alliance partner, right? Because they had multiple individual tribes, and eventually, I think ultimately, as you can see, historically, it wasn't a good decision. I think there's like some quote from some dude, but I can't really some quote for something, but I can't really remember it off the top of my head. Uh, Competition between England, there was sort of a lot of proxy wars, as always is, skirmishes, sort of poking at each other, and each of them tried to establish their influence further and further. Uh, who was it? I think there's a book called The Art of War. I'm sure you've heard of it, and I think it was Sun Tzu that said, "If you know the enemy and you know thyself, you need not fear the result of 1,000 battles," or something like that. Or maybe it was like, yeah, it was something like that. To paraphrase a little bit. But I think that's a little bit relevant here because neither side really recognized the other side's true power, and they weren't really organized in their battling. This has caused a lot of hundreds of battles, small scale battles, in which neither side was able to mount a truly effective offensive. George Washington, who was he? He was a general, and he led the American forces. And in 1754, he ignited the so-called French Indian War. Why is it called the French and Indian War? Because the French and Indians alliance with themselves and attempted to fight against the powerful British. The French and Indian War became sort of a large conflict because the France and England were two of the most global powers throughout the time. They had many colonies, and there were many proxy wars throughout in other areas of the world. Uh, but despite it, Britain won. Britain won, even despite France's power. But Britain managed to win, and Britain's post-war policies, morale was at an all-time high for Britain. Right, the colonists wanted to stay with Britain after this giant win they just pulled off. They were really rallying towards Britain, but Britain made one big mistake, which was their taxation policies. They started taxing the Americans and restricting the what the Americans could buy, where they could buy, their freedoms. This alienated these colonists, and this led to the revolution. Who I think it was a British economist. If you know Adam Smith, he authored a book called The Wealth of Nations, and this was sort of a the primary book of economics. If you look at so-called father of economics. Adam Smith is up there, along with David Ricardo, of course. But I think Adam Smith is held to a higher standard because of his identification of many important economic things. Uh, Sorry, I'm using a little bit colloquial language and not speaking too properly, but I think Adam Smith says little else is required for an from a prosperous nation except easy taxes, peace, and tolerable administration of justice. The British did not manage the taxes too well, high taxes. Did they have peace? Reasonably. They sort of managed this one, I'll give it to them. Administration of justice, it wasn't so good. There's a lot of the at least for the colonists, they felt like they he doesn't even need administration of justice. You don't need it. You need the perception of administration of justice. And to the colonies, they felt like colonists, they felt like they weren't getting their fair share. Braddock's blunder. British General Edward Braddock sort of made a blunder, made a mistake. He underestimated the French and Indian forces, and they lost a lot of things, and they realized that in the terrain, guerrilla tactics were very, very much efficient. And the British often weren't prepared for this. Okay, so chill. How does this resonate with me? What resonates with me most, I think, is Bragg's blunder. I can relate to blundering many times in my life, and I think it teaches you to fail hard. Failing hard helps you sort of build the stand for your success because failure isn't something to be feared. But often, even though you know this in your head and philosophically, it's hard to have a not an inherent fail of fear. I mean, sorry, fear of failure. But despite that, you should aspire. You should try to not have this sense of fear because failure isn't something to be feared. At its basis sense, failure is simply is just a data point. And the more data points you have, the more failures you have, the better it is. Like imagine someone who's tried something twice, but imagine someone who's done it 1,000 times. I think there's a really famous adage or aphorism, I believe, where it's like the master has failed more than the student has tried. So I think Braddock's blunder is what resonates with me personally. What's most surprising? Again, Braddock's blunder. I'd have to say it's the most surprising to me. One, I didn't even know. I had no preconceptions about it. Two, I think um, just completely lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry, I was talking about which one is the most important, I believe, or no, which is the most surprising? Yeah, Braddock's blunder, because I really didn't realize that the British had these sort of mistakes not due to just overpowering, but sort of logistical errors, which is something I can relate to too. I feel like 99% of the work and most things you do are just logistical. That's just the truth of it. People management, logistical, and I think it would do great good if if more people had better quality skills in these areas. I think people management is very, very vital. And yeah, to cap it off, thank you guys for watching. And yeah, see you guys later. Thank you guys so much.